7. Interviews with myself. Trinity College, 1970 to 1974, Part 1. Well, on a personal level, like Campbell, the Trinity experience was for me pretty miserable. To be frank, most of my personal experiences in educational institutions as a student have been miserable, and quite a few of my experiences as a teacher as well. In fact, it seems like I really have been pretty miserable for most of the time. People have always been telling me to smile. They still do. Dad was the first. A few years back in Brunei, I realized that I wasn't a smiler because I noticed that all the students at break time had smiles on their faces. Anyway, I've gotten fed up with people telling me to smile. Why can't people just leave me be? I don't go around telling people to be miserable, do I? In 1969, while I was still at Campbell, I applied to 3 universities. Durham, because my geography teacher was a graduate from there. St Andrews in Scotland, I don't really know why. And Trinity College in Dublin. I was offered a place in all 3 and chose Trinity in the end, because although it was far away from home, it wasn't too far away. I remember being very nervous at the idea of leaving home. And my brother, elder brother, was taunting me with, "Don't you feel a little bit diffident about going to Dublin?" He knew I did. "Yes," I said naively. He thought this was very funny. I didn't. I remember saying to him at such moments, "You seem to have no moral standard to which I can appeal." This made him laugh out loud at me even more, and he would taunt me with, "No, that's right, I don't." There were many such moments with my brother in those days. I stayed with my aunt in Dublin for my first year. I can see now that it was a master stroke on the part of my parents, but I didn't think so at the time. My aunt, my mum's sister, was recovering from a heart attack, and she used to spend a lot of time in bed. She was a tall, elegant, strikingly handsome woman, but also a lonely old spinster and rather a sad figure in some ways. Mum used to say she had plenty of suitors in her youth, but that a prince wouldn't be good enough for B, and Mum was probably right. In the evenings I would cycle home and she would be in bed waiting for me. She liked me and enjoyed my company. She had a great sense of humour and laughed, and I was able to practice my skills as a comedian on her. It wasn't difficult, as she giggled like a schoolgirl at everything I said. If only all the other girls had giggled like she did. I mean the younger ones that I was interested in. Well, I would have been in 7th heaven at Trinity. But they didn't. I liked my aunt, but she could be cold and cruel, so I decided I had to leave and strike out on my own towards the end of the first year. And I was lacking in self-confidence, so at the end of that first year, um, well, I had difficulty speaking with everyone, not just students, even, well, lecturers. I purchased an auto-suggestion correspondence course. Now we're talking about 1970 here. This was an avant-garde thing, and it was designed to build up my self-confidence. It consisted of repeating mantras over and over to myself, such as, I am good, I am confident, I can do this, I can speak to this person. It was based on suggestion of the subconscious mind. I really don't know how effective it was, but at the very least, it distracted me for a while from my almost permanent introspective obsession with my shyness. At the end of the first year, I was really quite depressed, and I decided to speak to my religious minister about my shyness. He was very sympathetic, and he wrung his hands in genuine anguish, and he subcontracted the job out to psychiatrists. He didn't know what to do about it. So the psychiatrist, I had one visit with her, remember, in Belfast, and nothing much happened, except that she asked me how many O levels I'd passed and how many I'd failed at school. It seemed to me, yes, that she thought school and education, it all came back to that in the end. Anyway, I went back to Dublin and started visiting the psychiatrist at the college, and he seemed to think there was nothing much wrong with me. Not surprising, because he in fact seemed a lot more nervous than I was myself. I remember him saying that I should not choose my friends on the basis of emotional needs. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I was desperate for friends. I certainly didn't choose them. Anyway, I'm sure he was right about me, but I think he needed a few friends himself. Trinity was the first place I'd ever really seen the opposite sex. Coming from a boys' school and a boys-only family, I was not at all confident. Um, I certainly wanted to work out how to get into the bushes with them. There's no doubt about it. There was, but I expected some sort of foreplay, such as talking about important things like education, philosophy, the existence of God, religion, the origin of the universe, and of course cricket. And then we could all, go into the bushes. It came as a surprise to me that most girls seemed not to be disgusted by men's lasciviousness. I expected them to be, because I was disgusted by men's lasciviousness. In fact, I was disgusted by my own lasciviousness. On the contrary, many girls seemed to encourage and actually enjoy it. I just decided girls were weird, but I still wanted to go into the bushes with them. Yeah, I was a frustrated young man. Anyway, the next thing that happened really was I did make some friendships, but not with girls, with other guys there. There were several males, including Kay, and there was T, and there was J, and anyway, Jay, let's start with Jay. He was a really kind of a mentor for me at Trinity. He was a mature student in his late 20s. He was a red-handed son of the soil from County Offaly. He was definitely, for the 1970s, he was a real free-thinking radical. Very shy, he had an intensity about him. He was passionate about a wide range of subjects, from education, politics, and religion. I was strongly influenced by Jay. In my third year, he invited me to an encounter group. This was a 70s phenomenon. A group of strangers would meet for a weekend, young strangers, in the presence of a facilitator and sit around in a circle telling each other their intimate and innermost feelings about themselves and about each other as they were revealed. Sounded like a good idea to me, but unfortunately mine turned out to be a very painful experience, as one of the girls in the group made some quite negative comments about me, which I had a lot of trouble in dealing with. So, yes, that was a big disappointment. I shared some rooms with another guy called P at Trinity towards the end of the 4 years. So this was our final year. And we had been good friends for all 4 years, and we'd met actually playing cricket for the Trinity team. In the first year, he was a quiet, thoughtful fellow, but as time went on, Pete changed, and by the fourth year, he'd become a real go-getter. He rushed about from place to place like there was no tomorrow. He seemed to have lost all his idealism and ability to reflect. He just did things without thinking. I continued to think but didn't do much. P was ambitious, and he went on to have a very successful career in teaching, eventually becoming headmaster of a local private school. But, however, in fact, P went on to visit me many years later in Africa, and again, he changed a lot. He wasn't as impressed with Africa as I was, and we lost touch pretty much halfway through his career. So this was a good example of a friendship that just weakened through changing circumstances. We had different lives and we lost interest in each other. Very disappointing, but yeah, very good while it lasted, of course. I also shared a flat in Trinity with T, who was an art student, and much of his time was spent painting. He was a very talented artist and went on to have a very successful career as an artist in the USA. I enjoyed the verbal jousting with T on all topics, from religion and politics to art, science and education. We don't do that nowadays. I feel with all the online universities, we don't have that amazing interaction that I had with my friends in those days as an undergraduate. I remember our delightful weekends at T's farm, meeting his family. Unfortunately, again, more disappointment, more friendship. T went on, he pursued a different life. Later on, we teamed up again, of course, at my instigation. It's actually his wife was running a volunteer project in Ghana, which I went to in 2014, but I wasn't happy with the way she was running it. And of course, because she was T's wife, T and I ran into problems and the friendship dissolved. So this is a good example again of how friendship can be so delicate unless it is nurtured. And it wasn't. We went for far too long without being in touch. Not altogether my fault in that case, I think. So then there's another friend, Kay, and Kay I met in the first year at Trinity. Kay had a very sad story actually at Trinity. He was doing a general science course, and this is a very interesting point about the education system, how inflexible it was in those days. He had a general science course, and he was very good in all his subjects, except one, which was chemistry, which he was hopeless at. Ken couldn't pass his chemistry, and so they actually made him repeat all four subjects after 3 months at the end of his year because he couldn't pass his chemistry. Now, I never understood that mentality. He was very good in all the other subjects, but they made him repeat them. Then he failed it again after the 3 months, and they made him repeat the whole year, all the subjects. I just find that the most appalling, cruel, callous system. So anyway, Kay was pretty much embittered by that experience and coloured much of the rest of his career. Kay went on, though. He went on to be, we were soulmates, and we spent a lot of days at his parents' caravan in the west of Ireland, discussing everything under the sun. Again, something nobody does nowadays with your online universities. He was kind, generous, and eccentric, and I appreciated him as a friend. And yeah, anyway, after a brief career in teaching, Ken became the principal of a school in Kuwait, which was destroyed by Saddam Hussein's army when it invaded in 1990. This traumatic event had a dramatic effect on Ken's career, as he didn't work again for many years. However, eventually he married and settled in the USA and then eventually moved to Turkey. And I understand he's still there and spends half of his time between Turkey and Ireland. Then there was another Kay, who was a friend of mine from Campbell, and then we continued friendship at Trinity. It wasn't a particularly strong friendship at Campbell, nor at Trinity. But Ken was very different from me. He was streetwise and a very sound and reliable fellow, with a dry sense of humour. I seemed to amuse him. I think he thought I was naive, and this seemed to endear him to me. I was naive, of course. I've had many friends who have befriended what they have perceived as my naivety. One anecdote is worth telling about Kay. It will give some idea of the type of relationship we had. And it's a good story. One night, we were leaving college on foot from the library. I was carrying my briefcase, and he was carrying his, and he was to the right of me. We were walking in tandem, having an animated conversation about something, when I suddenly pitched headlong downwards and forwards into the night. I tumbled and crashed into the cellar of a building, and I think it was the botany department, and I disappeared entirely from public view. It was pitch black, of course. As I picked myself up from the ground, I realized Kay was peering down at me, and he was worried, obviously, into the cellar and asking me if I was okay. After dusting myself off, I was able to tell him that I was completely unscathed, whereupon he immediately disappeared from view, collapsed in a wild fit of hysterics. When I finally climbed out of the cellar, I could see him clinging to the ivy of the walls of the building to support himself and prevent himself collapsing with laughter. We went for a drink, and Kay could simply not stop laughing for the rest of the evening. He was beside himself. Over the next few days, every time we saw each other, he would just dissolve into hysterical laughter without a word. Hysterical, I should say. I realized then, at last, that I was finally good at something. I had talent for making people laugh. I haven't seen Kay for about 30 years, but I'm sure if I met him today and mentioned that incident, he would dissolve into hysterics again. I worked bloody hard at Trinity, studying every night in the library. I had an elaborate revision program for examinations. It started months before the examinations. It required a lot of planning. But Kay, he didn't go to the library at all. He just read through his notes one night before the examinations. This was all the work he did, and it was enough for him to pass second division, first grade. I considered Kay to be a lucky bastard.